Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who's on assignment in Vermont this weekend, but we'll be back next week. This is the B block, or second section of our show. And once again, I'll just try and live up to Elena's performance, but apologize if I fall a little short. Next up, our look at international cannabis news. And you know how we say and urge our audience to consume responsibly? You know, it used to be so much easier to enjoy this plant medicine long before we learned about the terms like, and these are difficult to say, endocannabinoid system or neurotransmitters. Then, of course, you have your chemical alphabet soup of THC, CBD, CBG, CBN, and now HHC. That stands for hexahydrocannabidiol. That is why knowing some scientific terms and processes can help you on your next visit to a dispensary. And now back to HHC. It is derived from hemp plants with a low level of THC in a lab, where many are calling this the new derivative hot hemp light. It can be compared to Delta 8, but does not have the same chemical makeup. Does it get you high or not, right? That's what you want to know. International regulators are getting involved to place HHC onto a list of banned or unapproved substances. Ben Stevens is our European correspondent, and he has that story plus some good news for France.
I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's European Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, or the CND, has voted to place hexahydrocannabinol, better known as HHC, under Schedule 2 of the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, meaning it's now effectively banned under international law. Every country present at the vote, with the notable exception of the United States, voted in favour of its ban. The US abstained and stated it was unable to vote, but said that the substance is already regulated domestically. Anyone with any good knowledge of the issues the US is currently having with the intoxicating hemp industry will know this is questionable. Like other synthetic cannabinoids, HHC has spread very rapidly across Europe and has seen regulation really fail to keep pace with its spread, especially considering how easily it can be made from readily available, very legal industrial hemp. Often marketed as hemp-derived, it's found sprayed on low THC cannabis to mimic the effects of traditional THC products. Critics argue that synthetic alternatives like HHC exploit regulatory loopholes, allowing untested high-potency substances to be sold without oversight. Elsewhere, France has finally taken one step closer to formally legalising its medical cannabis industry after years of political delays. Two key government decrees detailing the production and dispensing of cannabis-based medicines have now been sent to the European Commission for review. This is an essential regulatory milestone before medical cannabis can become part of the French healthcare. If approved, France could finalise its regulatory framework within months, but patients may still have to wait longer before prescriptions are available. Each cannabis-based medicine will still need to go through individual approvals from the French health authorities, and pricing reimbursement negotiations could further delay the process. Advocates warn that despite progress, the history of kicking the can down the road in France on medical cannabis policy could impose further delays and also lead to severe restrictions on access when it's finalised. This follows around 4 years of testing in France, which launched a pilot project to gather data on the medical cannabis industry in 2021. This has been pushed back numerous times and until very recently was expected not to be going forward at all. That's all for this week. I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's European Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Continuing with our international block of cannabis news, Debi Facey is in Canada and has some changes coming to that sovereign nation's regulations and celebrating the fact that Canada is the #1 exporter of cannabis in the world. Who would have thunk that? Here's Debi's Canadian Cannabis Report.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is Health Canada has officially rolled out their new regulations, which was on March 12th. And those regulations now include a lot more for the microcultivars that are going to be able to be growing and expanding their growth, as well as packaging is no longer going to be solid. You're going to be able to see through it, which is going to be making it a lot easier for consumers and for the actual bud tenders to be able to tell, know, and conversate with their customers when it comes to the bud. And also, we're going to be having the pre-roll limitation be uplifted when it comes to many of these cannabis products that are infused. What we also have is the news that Canada is the top exporter of cannabis, even though we in Canada haven't necessarily been doing great when it comes to our overall, I would say, performance. But in the world, when it comes to actual exportation, we are number one. Yippee! This is Debi Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
A few more notes from Canada. Part of those changes in regulations that Debi just reported on include opening a public comment period for citizens to chime in on making CBD products available over the counter. In the meantime, another Canadian-based company, Tilray, is launching a high THC medicinal grade product in its German market. The Tilray Craft brand will feature a strain with 2.9% of a terpene mix, as much as 25% THC. A recent report by Statistics Canada seeks a decline in alcohol use by that country's citizens and an increase in cannabis use and sales. Now, use and revenue are still way behind the alcohol industry in Canada, but it does confirm the same trend that has happened here in the U.S., where there is now more daily use of cannabis than daily use of alcohol. And according to a new poll by YouGov, a majority of Americans now believe that alcohol consumption is more harmful than regular cannabis use. Interestingly enough, in that same poll, adults say they actually personally prefer drinking to consuming cannabis, despite the newly discovered health news about alcohol. When asked about which substance is more dangerous, is it alcohol or cannabis, amazingly, 58% said alcohol is more dangerous, as opposed to the just 19% who said the opposite is true. I guess the devil you know is considered less dangerous than the one you don't know. It really is a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Now let's check in with Christopher Bright from Maryland, who tells us about a lawsuit by Curaleaf employees over the distribution of their tip money in dispensaries.
Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Let's dig in. A legal storm is brewing at Curaleaf, the world's largest publicly traded cannabis company. Employees are suing the dispensary giant, alleging its tip-sharing practices are breaking federal law. Here's the scoop. In a Maryland federal court, bud tenders are fighting back. The lawsuit claims the company illegally divvies up tips to include managers and supervisory leads, shortchanging the workers who serve you at the counter. Filed by former Ricestown employee Gabriella Beck and Montgomery Village bud tender Ronnie Matthews, the suit seeks class action status for hundreds of workers across Curaleaf's 14 states, including Maryland's hotspots like Columbia and Frederick. The Fair Labor Act says tips belong to employees, not supervisors, but the plaintiff says Curaleaf's been playing at its own rules. Attorney Sarah Block estimates bud tenders are losing hundreds of dollars monthly. Curaleaf denies the claims, calling their policies fair and transparent, and vows to fight in court. And now we have this week's content creator of the week. Let me introduce you to Keisha, or the Connected CEO. Her groundbreaking work in the political side of cannabis and her initiative with the Explore Maryland Cannabis Awards deserves our recognition. Keisha has not only forged a remarkable path in the cannabis industry, but has also illuminated the way for countless other creators to thrive. Be sure to follow her on IG at The Connected CEO. And this has been this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's a new state coming out to join the legalization movement in the race to 25. It's the state of Kansas. This week, 2 bills were introduced that would establish a regulatory body for adult use of cannabis and a medical program as well. The Senate and House bills in Kansas both established licenses for cultivation, manufacturing, possession, and sale of the plant medicine. No such issues, of course, in a state that showcases the adult playground of Las Vegas, Nevada. That's where Tina Tasaka hangs out. She has that story, plus the slowdown of the rollout of cannabis social clubs in her report this week.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Are the stakes too high when it comes to cannabis consumption lounges? Only 2 state-recognized cannabis consumption lounges have opened in Nevada, Smoke and Mirrors and Dazed, and Nuwu, tribally owned, is the 3rd. Despite years of planning and dozens of applicants, state lawmakers, including Assembly Speaker Steve Yeager, wants answers. Yeager praised the 2 operational lounges, but questioned the slow progress. Cannabis Compliance Board head James Hum cited financial barriers, specifically a $200,000 liquidity requirement, as the primary obstacle. While 21 lounges are ready for final approval, Hum suggested the CCB might reduce or eliminate the financial requirements to help social equity applicants. Additionally, finding suitable locations for independent operators remains a challenge. Due to fewer lounges opening than expected, the CCB will cut 2 compliance officer positions. There's legislation pending for Assembly Bill 307, which aims to change how cannabis is taxed. It gets rid of the 15% tax that cannabis growers pay when selling to other businesses. Instead, it increases the tax on customers buying cannabis in stores or lounges from 10% to 14.25%. This way, the tax is collected when people make a purchase. For the bill to pass, 2/3 of lawmakers must agree. In tribal news, 2025 Hemp News publication predicts the growing influence of indigenous leadership in the U.S. hemp building industry. Tribal hemp companies are playing a key role throughout the supply chain, including financing. Notably, the Southern Ute Tribe of Colorado recently provided venture capital for Panda Biotech, a hemp processing startup. The popularity of hempcrete is expected to rise in 2025, especially with the release of Patagonia's short film, Green Buffalo, which showcases the Lower Sioux tribe's housing achievements. More tribes, along with the Indigenous Habitat Institute, are also leading the green building movement. The article predicts an increase in hemp-based housing on tribal lands in 2025. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Now that we've moved the clocks ahead on the East Coast, plus temperatures returning to normal for March, it's almost time for April and spring. A sure sign of spring in the Midwest is the annual celebration of cannabis in Ann Arbor, Michigan, called the Hash Bash. It's the 50th anniversary this year. Amie Carter is back and reminds us of that, plus a story about a bust in Michigan of over 2,000 pounds.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a major bust in southwest Michigan, police seized over 2,000 pounds of cannabis, along with psychedelics and a butane hash oil operation. The operation, located just 60 feet from a home with young children, raised some serious safety concerns. Multiple individuals are facing charges, and a hazmat team was called in to handle the cleanup. On a different note, February wasn't the best month for Michigan cannabis sales, which fell by 7.6% compared to last year. But don't worry, over $331 million in tax revenue from recreational cannabis is being distributed to local municipalities and schools, ensuring the community benefits from this industry. And in some more local news, a Macomb Township man is facing felony charges after authorities found nearly 120 pounds of cannabis and $7,000 in cash linked to illegal sales in his truck. And again, don't forget to mark your calendars for April 5th, which is Hash Bash in Ann Arbor at high noon. Cannot wait to see you there. That's your quick scoop for this week. I'm Amie Carter with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Before we go into our second break, let's check in with Oklahoma's Kimmie Cannabis.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report from Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We have had a lot of action this past week from the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics Marijuana Enforcement teams. On Tuesday, March 11th, they served a search warrant at Pegasus 420 LLC in Oilton. The business was allegedly operating under a fraudulent OBN registration using a straw ownership scheme to appear compliant. During the raid, agents stated to have seized over 22,000 marijuana plants, 647 pounds of processed product, and made one arrest. More arrests are expected as the investigation continues. OBN was supported by the Creek County Sheriff's Department, the Attorney General's Office, the District Attorney's Office, and the Oklahoma National Guard. Then, on March 12th, another search warrant was served, this time in South Oklahoma City, where OBN agents raided a warehouse on Southwestern, being used as a stash house tied to ongoing black market trafficking. Simultaneously, OMMA and the Attorney General's Office executed a separate but related search warrant at the marijuana business next door. According to sources, 6 armed enforcement agents rushed in with ARs, only to find 2 women seated behind desks. After 2 hours of interrogations, no arrests were made that day. And finally, a heartfelt story from with our community. On March 14th, Paula Venegas and Tim Lanham, the founders of the nonprofit Oklahoma Autism and Cannabis, lost their home and beloved dog Ethel in a wildfire that tore across their property. The couple has 2 autistic children and has worked tirelessly to help families across Oklahoma. Now the cannabis community is rallying behind them. One example, Knowles Family Farm is hosting a fundraiser auction, and they have donated a special unreleased cultivar, now officially named Ethel in honor of the beloved companion. Bidding starts at $50 with added bonuses at every $1 to $200. Every cent will go directly to the Lanham family. Let's come together, Oklahoma, just like we always do. I'm Kimmie Cannabis, and this has been the Oklahoma Cannabis Update for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
That will do it for the B block of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When we come back, we'll have that preview talk with Mark Shepard of NECANN, that of course is coming to Boston for its 13th year this coming weekend. And that's where I'll be creating a special report on that annual event. Plus, we check in on New York and New Jersey with Pam Schmiel and Jill Goldsberry. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.